Vikings in Oklahoma? Sounds ridiculous. You mean to tell me it's possible that Vikings went from here all the way to here? Yes, that's the truth. At least, according to some people. Sure, Leif Erikson might have said something along the lines of,
I'm pretty far from okay.
but we're going to be looking at something that's pretty odd here that has a lot of people pointing at the possibility of this theory being real. There are, in fact, runestones in the U.S. state of Oklahoma. For those of you who don't know, runestones are a large stone carved with runes by ancient Scandinavians or Anglo-Saxons, according to Google Dictionary. And there's not just one of these runestones in Oklahoma, not even two. There's been 3 runestones found within close proximity of one another, right smack in the middle of the United States. But why are they here? What do they mean? And most importantly, how did they get here? While it is extremely far-fetched to say that Scandinavian explorers reached the Americas, there's much more mind-bending theories out there that claim that people across the Atlantic and Pacific reached the Americas before Columbus. One discovery from the 1930s suggested that the ancient Romans reached the Americas more than 1,000 years before anyone else. This discovery is a terracotta head resembling a Roman artifact. It is commonly referred to as the Calixtowalhaka head. Calixtowalhaka head. It was unearthed among many pre-Columbian grave goods, suggesting its significant age. Romeo A. Tristov of the University of New Mexico suggested that the head could be of Roman-based origins due to its stylistic resemblance of that of Roman artifacts from the Severian Emperor's period, which was from 193 to 235 AD. A thermoluminescence test was even conducted on the Calixtowalhaka head in 1995, establishing the head's age to be somewhere between 9th century BC and 13th century AD. This confirms its pre-colonial prevalence in the theory proposed by Romeo A. Tristov. While many have proposed that it could be a hoax planted by a participating archaeologist, others have suggested that it could have been brought over by an early pre-Columbian visitor, or that it was traded via a transatlantic trade route. Either way, Christov, however, maintains that the most plausible explanation is the possibility of a Roman, Phoenician, or Berber ship, or the drifting of such shipwreck reaching the American shores. So relative to this theory, or the theory that the ancient Chinese made it to the Americas before Columbus, which we're not going to talk about, it's really not that far-fetched to make the claim that the Norse made it all the way to Oklahoma. First and foremost, though, I'd like to say that it's essentially common knowledge at this point that Viking explorers were the very first Europeans to stumble across the Americas, more specifically, North America. Unless you are this guy who clearly wasn't a fan of my video covering the main penny. Yeah. Much of this knowledge of Viking explorers reaching North America stems not just from various Viking sagas about it, but even from the remains of a fairly decent-sized Norse settlement discovered in Newfoundland, Canada, often referred to La'an's Ox Meadows. There's even theories that go as far as to say that Vikings went as far as Maine or even Martha's Vineyard. But the Havana runestone theory, the Oklahoma runestone, is just downright bizarre and says otherwise. Tucked deeply within the mystical lands of Oklahoma
This is real mystic and all, but do you have anything to eat here?
lies a hotly debated subject which still baffles some researchers today. Somewhat. It is by far the largest and perhaps the only piece of evidence for the claim that Vikings traveled to Oklahoma. It's a massive 12-foot tall and 10-foot wide stone that has Viking writing, also known as runes, carved into it. This 16-inch stone can be found near a fresh spring and is called the Oklahoma runestone, or more commonly known as the Heavener runestone. It is speculated by some that this runestone was carved by adventurous Viking explorers that stopped at Potu Mountain in what is now near the town of Heavener, Oklahoma. The first recorded knowledge of the Heavener runestone goes all the way back to the 1830s when it was first found by a Choctaw hunting party. In the coming years, many Oklahomans referred to it as the Indian Rock, believing it to be Native American carvings. There are various theories as to what the stone means, with some saying it reads Gnomedal, which means Gnome Dale, or Valley of the Gnomes. The Gnome and Dal portion of the stone are also thought to mean Sundial Valley, or Monument Valley. Later scholars have translated the runestone as saying Glomedal, which means Glom's Valley. Well, the first logical thought that comes to mind may be that Glom is the name of a Viking explorer that carved his stake in the Heavener region. The only issue here is that Glom didn't exist yet. At least that's what I found when conducting research on the matter. The claim of the stone referring to the southern Swedish province of Glom was made by none other than the president of Friends of the Heavener runestone, Mike Kennerson. When I tried to research if this was actually a province, the closest thing I found to a Glom in Sweden was a locality called Glommen in Falkenberg Municipality, Halland County, which only contained 761 inhabitants in a 2010 census. Aside from being a locality of a city instead of a province, the issue with this is that Glommen came to be in the late 1800s when a small fishing port was formed around the city. This means that Glommen didn't exist until after the first report of the Heavener runestone by the Choctaw hunting party in the 1830s. I even went as far as consulting the intellectual hive mind of the internet, Reddit. But after extensive internet research and Reddit consultation, I couldn't find anything anywhere in Sweden named Glom before the 1930s. I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say 1830s. That's right. So with Glommen clearly being ruled out of the picture at this point, I did what any other investigative YouTuber would do in this position, which was to reach out to the man himself, Mike Kennerson. Unfortunately, after several attempted calls and leaving quite a few voicemails,
Is this
Mike Kennerson,
No, this is Patrick.
I was unable to get a hold of Mike. So unless any of you live in Sweden and know of any province or municipality or city or state, whatever, that is named Glom or something similar that's lost in translation, Mike Kennerson's claim puts the alleged province of Glom up there with the likes of Atlantis, El Dorado, and Narnia. Even with this mystery being unsolved, there's still much more to this mystery that is even more important.
It looks like we found ourselves a mystery.
A big question for us is, who specifically do we know that traveled here? Surely it would be in one of the Viking sagas, wouldn't it? But we don't see any description matching the description of Oklahoma, or even anywhere in the North American heartland of the Midwest, for that matter. The only North American landscapes that align to the Viking sagas seem to be eastern Canada and northeastern United States. But even this question dwarfs the biggest question of all: how would these runes end up here in the first place? What quite a few people theorize is that a Viking ship made it across the Atlantic, traveled south along the Atlantic coast, into the Gulf of Mexico, all the way up the Mississippi River, and into the Arkansas River, all around 750 AD. As crazy as it may sound, this is what many believe due to these runestones randomly being in the middle of the continental United States. It's worth noting that despite there being evidence of Viking presence in Oklahoma due to the Hebner runestone, 0 Norse artifacts have been found anywhere in the state or in neighboring states. One would think that something would be found within at least a 100-mile radius of here after being dropped by one of these explorers or traded with natives. Something like the Maine penny, for instance, which is a Viking coin found at the site of a former Native American settlement in Brooklyn, Maine in 1957, actually makes sense. Viking explorers were thought to have traveled this down south and at the very least were confirmed to have explored and settled in an area not too far north from this location. The coin itself was thought to have potentially been traded with natives or dropped by Viking explorers. But unlike the Maine penny, 0 artifacts were found anywhere in Oklahoma. To look for more clarity on this matter, we're going to travel all the way up north to the upper Midwest, where there is more alleged evidence for Norse expeditions beyond just the northeastern seaboard of North America. Here, we will be looking at a site that has been a supposed hotspot for many Viking artifacts, and even another runestone. Minnesota, home of the Vikings. The NFL team, that is.
We're here. Oh, no!
This state, similarly to Oklahoma, is also one with many allegations of its very own authentic runestone. On top of that, unlike the state of Oklahoma, Minnesota is said to have its very own artifacts that were found throughout the area. But between the runestone and the artifacts, the runestone is by far the most compelling piece of evidence behind Vikings traveling to Minnesota. This runestone is commonly referred to as the Kensington runestone. Found in 1898 by a man by the name of Oklahomans, I probably butchered the ever-living out of that name. The Kensington runestone was allegedly unearthed by the Swedish immigrant in a field in the small rural town of Solom while he was clearing his land of trees. Named after the nearby settlement of Kensington, the runestone was found lying face down and tangled in the roots of a tree that was estimated to be roughly 10 to 40 years old. The massive 202-pound stone was initially thought by Oman and his 10-year-old son to be an Indian almanac, but when a copy on the inscription was sent to Olas J. Breda, I also probably butchered that, a professor of Scandinavian language and literature, it was then deemed to be a forgery. Geologist Harold Edwards also weighed in on the runestone, saying that the inscription is about as sharp as the day it was carved. The letters are smooth, showing virtually no weathering. The Kensington runestone is currently on display at the Runestone Museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, despite being heavily proven to be fraudulent multiple times. Norwegian immigrant Hjalmar Holland, who acquired the runestone in 1907, begged to differ. He made it his main priority in life to prove all of those losers and haters wrong.
Losers.
You know, the whole thing with Hjalmar being Norwegian and all makes this whole thing kind of sus in the first place. To nobody's surprise, he ended up being wrong, and almost every credible researcher out there says all runestones and artifacts found in Minnesota are inauthentic. So, what would we say that the final verdict on the Hebner runestone is? A great explanation for this runestone and the others surrounding it have been kindly provided to us by archaeologist Lyle Thompson in his 2007 master's thesis for the University of Leicester. This thesis examined the runestone, specifically the Hebner runestone, and recognized that, number one, there is no cultural evidence of Vikings in or near the region. Number two, no Old Norse approach to translation fits this stone. Number three, the stone's most likely translation is Gnomedale, in other words, Valley of the Gnomes. Number four, Scandinavian presence in the nearby town of Hebner is early and the likeliest source of the carving of the stone. Number 5, old purported runestones in the region are modern creations or misinterpreted Native American rock art. Fuck you, Lyle. Thanks for ruining a really cool theory, even though deep down, a lot of us figured this not to be true.
Brother, this guy stinks!
In all seriousness, Lyle's theory is very, very, very likely the case, though it's not entirely for sure. So, sorry about that, Lyle. Aside from Lyle's theory, it's also worth mentioning that the Hebner runestone uses 6th century symbols together with both the newer and older Firthark runes. Even more of a red flag in all of this is that medieval Scandinavians did not erect runestones when abroad. One of the few single examples of this is from the late Viking era and located in Crimea on a small 18-inch stone. Runestones were typically erected as landmarks, remembrances over dead people, or proclamations of great deeds, not as landmarkers. They were also carved ornamentally and in snakes with decorations and lines around the text by skilled carvers. These carvers spent a lot of time on these things and were well paid for their efforts, and ultimately always left their name on the end of the stone. In the end, people typically attribute the creation of the Hebner runestone to that of the nearby locals, many being descendants of Scandinavian immigrants. There's several other far-fetched claims out there, such as a Welsh guy making it there during medieval times, as well as monks and the Chinese and Egyptians. Whether or not these are actually the remnants left behind by courageous Viking explorers, the Hebner runestone has captured the imaginations of Oklahomans and nearby locals for decades now. It's even becoming more and more of a popular international tourist destination over the past few years. Additionally, it's brought out a cool cultural tradition for the local community. And that, I'd have to say, is pretty darn cool. Thank you for watching today's episode of Amateur Archaeology. After I made this video, I found out that Mike Kennerson had passed away, which explains me not getting any calls back from him. So to Mike and his family, may he rest in peace. Mike, thank you for all your work on this runestone. Also to Lyle, if you're watching this, we're sorry for throwing a bit of shade at you. It's just a joke. We like to have a little bit of fun on this channel, which is why to all of you out there that aren't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button on the bottom.